Welcome to Brent Locked In. This is a video interview series with remarkable people from Brent. My name is Savannah and I've lived in Kingsbury my whole life. Today I'm going to be talking to Guy Gunaratne, who's an author and journalist. And we're going to be talking about his book and growing up in Brent and all the different things for this conversation today. So, Guy, firstly, how are you? How have you found lockdown?
I'm very good, thank you. Lockdown has been odd. I'm up in Sweden at the minute. I live between sort of London, Cambridge, and Malmö in the southern tip of Sweden. And in Sweden, the lockdown hasn't been all that apparent. A lot of the security measures have been around elderly homes, care homes, and in Sweden particularly, a lot of the elderly are kind of concentrated around those areas. So in the city centres like this, it's not as severe.
And so, Guy, you grew up in Neasden. So, can you tell us a bit about what that was like growing up in Neasden?
Yeah, I think have like a complicated relationship with it. It wasn't all that easy. Neasden is a place, and you grew up near there, so you kind of know it's. I've always described it as a nowhere place, and that's, I think, just a personal kind of experience with it. It's very easy to kind of feel like there is really no community there. It's not really allowed to flourish because Neasden itself is kind of like it's split apart by this dual carriageway. So people usually just drive through it to the IKEA or Wembley or wherever, and no one really actually situates there or stays there. People who do move there stay there for a couple of years to move on to the nicer boroughs next door, Kilburn or whatever. So, growing up there, it was difficult, but you learn to create art from where you're from. I managed to do that.
And then you speak about people, I guess, moving out, like a quick turnover of like residents moving in and moving out. So are your parents still living in Neasden, or are they one of those people that moved out?
Yeah, my dad will never leave Neasden. He landed there like in I'd say he came to the UK in the 50s, so he stayed from the 60s on around like Cricklewood, Neasden, and there's like we've been moved around, but like basically like roads apart, and I can't see him staying there. He's quite elderly now, so like he's not gonna leave.
So I'm guessing you grew up in the 80s in terms of like, so what was that like? Because a few people I've spoken to, I've always asked them what was like growing up in the 80s, because there's such a decade of like culture and arts and stuff like that. So for you, what was it like?
I grew up in the 90s. I feel like I was born in 84. I can't remember anything in the 80s, but the 90s were, I don't know, like it's I just remember the kind of attitudes towards classrooms like mine, like in the 90s, where I grew up in, particularly the primary school I went to and the secondary school, they were so diverse, they were so multicultural, like a glut. It was really kind of rich in terms of like the kind of friends you have. Similar now, but at the time, that kind of thing, that kind of experience felt like it was taken for granted. I kind of felt like the entire country or the whole world was like this. Growing up with like someone from Ghana whose parents kind of spoke as sort of little English as mine, or like just the same kind of first generation immigrant experience. Like I can recognize my parents and other people's parents, even though they would be from Ghana or Nigeria or wherever, or Somalia. So it was kind of that felt so true to me. But I have noticed that the attitude towards that kind of experience has changed. It's no longer seen as some kind of like positive aspect of society, or even desirable even. And that's always a thing that I've felt quite close to, because it's my childhood, man. Like that's something that I felt there were problems with it, and there are things that growing up with that experience you take with you, especially when you start traveling places like Sweden, for example. Polar opposite, right? It's an experience I hope isn't going to be a rare one, but I know there's like a generation of artists that have also experienced that. Some of whom we've had on this. and I know the art becomes richer when it's been infused by that kind of amalgamation of cultures and languages and senses.
So going back to the 90s, then for a lot of people, that was, I guess, a sort of time where they think, you talk about the 90s, people talk about movies, they talk about music, they talk about the arts and stuff like that. So for you, was that kind of where you got your love for writing during that time, or tell us a bit about that for you, how it influenced you as a creative?
Yeah, it's funny, man. Like, it's odd talking about the 90s if it's like this block of history. Like, it's nuts because that's just, it feels so recent to me. But you know, like writing and reading was always so private to me. I didn't really grow up around anyone who aspired to be writers. I honestly couldn't say I was aspiring to be a writer. I knew I was creative. I knew that I was that way, but it wasn't really something I thought as of a path for me.
Yeah.
And I know enough people talk about Zadie on this, but like I remember reading White Teeth at Willesden Green Library, not really knowing about that book, Zadie Smith's White Teeth, and knowing that it was kind of a big deal book for lots of reasons, and seeing like the award sign on it, picking up at the library and reading the first page where it references Cricklewood and Willesden Green, and I was, you know, that I remember that being a shift in my mentality, that the world around you is kind of worthy of the page.
Yeah.
You know, and I didn't really have an inkling that I wanted to be a writer. I just knew I wrote a lot. I didn't really know other people weren't. But I knew that's something that felt so natural to me. I would be writing stories, short stories, even like long form, like essays and things that I would just find interesting. Not really thinking in any academic terms, or even thinking about like finding my voice or whatever. It felt like a natural extension. And it's strange all the way to now, where I look back and think, yeah, I guess I was writing since I was a kid. But it's like a retroactive narrative I've told myself, you know, like that was just something I was always doing. I wasn't really thinking of it as a career. The Times itself, I think what's interesting, speaking about that time, is that it was a time of like intense disruption. You had the millennium, and then you had to lead up to it, and then directly after it, 9/11, and like even just getting politically aware of the world, and getting a sense of the world whilst you're at that age where you're trying to explore yourself and the place you're from. It was a kind of a distressing time. Kind of still is. We're in the wake of that still, but I think as an artist, that kind of thing can't not influence and intensify the way you write or you create.
So in that case, then for you, do you have, I guess, like a stand-up memory of when you were younger, of a piece of writing that you produced that was kind of a turning point for you, where you might have been maybe really proud of it, or you thought, do you know what, yeah, I'm really good at this, and this is something I can see myself doing?
Oddly enough, not so much. I remember when I was very young, I forget how young, Brent Junior School is where I went to, on Crest Road. For some reason, we were writing poetry. It was sort of the first time I'd ever heard of such a thing. So like being able to put down verse and reading things like William Blake and Benjamin Zephaniah, like side by side.
Yeah.
And being able to think of yourself like, oh, let me just kind of use language in a way that evokes something, and writing something that I thought was right, and having a teacher, and I again forget the name of the teacher even, but having the teacher stand up and going, oh, this is actually pretty good, like, and showing another teacher it, and seeing that happen, a thing that I thought was interesting, elicited some kind of reaction from someone, and also just being fascinated by how other writers achieve the same thing within me. If I would read a bit of Zephaniah or someone, and being aware or being attentive to what I was feeling, and thinking, and how the language is working on me, trying to make me figure out inversely how I could create that as well. And I think that's something that's followed on ever since, even now.
And for me personally, like I love reading. Like I'm a massive reader, but I remember being young and my favorite thing to do on a weekly basis would be to go to the library, take up my 12 books that I planned to read for that week, and then go back the next week and do the same thing all over again. So was the library, I guess, a safe haven for you as well when you were younger?
Yeah, this is something I have to credit my parents for, because I had seen that massive building in Willesden Green Library all the time. But I remember the time when my folks took me there, and first of all, I was a film guy, so they had a VHS section, a DVD section over here, so I would go straight for them. But then, I don't know, I just, after a while, I just moved this way towards the children's books, like Terry Pratchett and people like that. Young adult, I suppose, is called now, but trying to do the same thing. I'd heard of a writer, just keep it in memory, just look for the name. Didn't really know what the context around Virginia Woolf was. I wasn't reading Woolf at that age, but I wouldn't know what the context around those writers were, or how sort of venerated they were. I would just kind of pick them out because I'd heard that it was good, and so I'd do that too. But yeah, the library was, for sure, safe haven. I think that's true for most libraries in most communities like ours.
Definitely. And I guess let's move on now to your book. So in Our Magical City, in the book you make a lot of references to grime, and I think even now, for many young people, grime, you listen to it, and because of your background and growing up in ends, I guess, you can actually really relate to it on a deeper connection than someone else listening to it. And for some people, I guess it's also kind of a form of rebellion in a sense. So for you personally, growing up listening to grime and these artists as they were, I guess, coming up, was it ever in some ways a form of rebellion for you in terms of where you were at that point in life?
You know what's strange? I think rebellion's an interesting word. I think that the time I was growing up, I was into American hip hop mostly. Yeah. So it was that was the I also remember a lot of my friends. There was that transition that happened where we were like, why are we listening to American rap when we got grime? So when suddenly there was just a shift in conscious that it felt more ours, and it was almost like a reclamation of something. It's kind of sounded like the era we grew up in. Kano was the one for me. For some reason, there was some tenderness about the way he was going about it. That just really deeply got to me, in the same level that a writer would with a novel. His first album, that was the one. I just remember How We Living as well. It's the one song no one talks about on that album, but for me, that's one of my favorite songs of all time. With guys like Kano, Jamie, there's something that seemed relatable. Is such a banal word to use for that, but that's what I'm going with. It's something relatable to it. There's something beyond just the delivery or even the references. There was a sense of it that felt ours.
So, I mean, in your book, you make a lot of slang references and you use a lot of slang terms. But one thing I thought when I was reading it is, did you ever at any point feel as though you had to contextualize or write the words in a way that would be, I guess, appealing to the publishing industry or potential readers who don't necessarily come from our demographic or our background to know what these actually mean?
Answers no way, because I kind of, again, I didn't really have an ambition to be a novelist. It was so beyond my expectations that it would ever even be read beyond me. There was something that I wanted to explore, themes I wanted to explore through fiction, and that's kind of what I was doing. It was my wife, my now wife, who was telling me you spent how many years writing this? You got to do something with it, and it's actually good. And so that's really the only reason I sent it to agents, and things just snowballed after that. The terms, in terms of the slang and the sort of dialect in the book, no. And it was great actually when I landed with that publisher, where they also weren't into glossaries or none of that. They didn't want to have to like have like a section at the end to explain, because it also asks the question, explain to who are we expecting? You know, it already kind of codifies who literature is for. And that's the place I didn't want to be.
I do think it's quite interesting that even if you look at, I guess, writers from a minority background, it's always a conversation that's had in the sense of, do you feel like you need to contextualize? Did you feel like you needed to code switch? But that's not something we would ask, like, I guess, a writer from the suburbs or a middle class background.
Totally.
They're talking about things that they know, their experiences. So I do agree with you. I do think it's very interesting that we, I guess, even have to have that conversation when it comes to writers of a certain background.
And I do want to stress though that like the conversation around this. There's two sides to this. There's stuff about the industry and why it is that expectation comes from like publishers or whatever. But there's also the conversation about just artists, like you write, so you kind of also have a responsibility to what you're doing. And I was lucky, and again, I landed with a great publisher, and when I was like first in, not really knowing about anything about like how the book's going to be rolled out or anything, I was quite insistent that I'm aware that me being who I am, or you perceive me as some way, and the book being the way it is, I'm going to get questions like this. I'm just not going to be into it. I'm just not going to do it. I think that comes from the fact that I never thought I'd be in that position anyway, and now it's here. It's not like I'm suddenly going to care about things that I didn't know existed 2 years ago. You know what I mean? Like I'm writing this for me. It's still for me, kind of thing. And if you kind of dig it, then that's cool. But like the next book, I'm just going to do the same way. Yeah. As an artist, especially when you grow up in places like Brent or parts of Brent, if you're creatively inclined, there's nothing much to remind you that there's worth there. And I see, especially like artists my age, no matter what you do, that confidence to say like, no, this is what I do. It's as valuable as you as a bank or an accountant or whatever. Like this is something that's worth something to you. And so to approach conversations around how the book's spoken about, that's on you to just stand up and say like, this is the parameters in which I would like to talk about this art. And if you have these questions, you can ask them. I don't have to answer them, you know. I think that I learned that from a few other writers who were kind enough to give me advice, and I'd stand by that any day.
And just, I guess, going back to your parents, like, I feel like there's this thing that any parent from a minority background, you talk about the creative industry, and it's like, no, that's not a profitable career. Did you ever have moments in your early career where your parents were like, no, son, I think you need to try something else?
Yeah, totally. They're just bemused by all of this. They still are. They kind of, I don't think they quite realize how it's happened or like what is actually happening. But the thing is, it's understandable, isn't it? Like my dad came over in the 50s, and every day since, including my mum, like working hard.
Yeah.
And the idea of not having a regular job where you get like a paycheck every month, that's so beyond the experience of what they had, that precarity in any industry is like, that's just not an option. I think that's kind of the sense I had of like arts in general or writing. Like that's just not a thing, is it? Like that's aside from being profitable, I don't see anyone like me up there, so how is that even a thing? So I can understand that sentiment. I get it. That's probably where the rebellion came in.
So I mean, going back to your book then, it touches on like many social political issues such as Islamophobia, even xenophobia. But I guess for you, from writing it when you did to looking at society now, for me personally, I would say things have potentially got even worse, especially like heightened by things such as Brexit. But for you, knowing from when you wrote the book and stuff, and I guess the issues of the time, like for example, with Lee Rigby, have you seen a shift in terms of things getting worse, or do you think it's the same, but now like, I guess, increasing people sharing things on social media, but it's just made us a bit more aware?
It really does depend on perspective, knowing that sort of we're on a journey. We haven't really we can't ever really look back and assess whether things have gotten worse. We don't know where this is headed. I mean, I have that thought about the internet in general, that in some ways it's opened up like a regression in civil discourse.
Yeah.
But it's also opened up ways for people who would be otherwise isolated to find each other and organize. Around the subjects you mentioned and the themes in the book, yeah, it's disappointing that they're still relevant and the book's still relevant. Like, I would like maybe the themes in the book to be coded as, you know, the early 2000s. Like, that's when we were dealing with it and things have settled down. But yeah, they're exacerbated. But I would pin that on the way we've gone about organizing ourselves and seeing and implicating ourselves in whatever resistances we find around us. I just wrote something about the feeling that sometimes art, writing, creatively expressing ourselves can act as a distance to the world. So you would respond to things out in the world as like, this makes me feel some kind of way, whether it's anger or distress. I'm going to write my way through this and I'm going to put it out there and maybe it helps. It's a wonderful thing. I'd encourage it. I'd also encourage walking outside and actually engaging with your body, with organizations. I think that's something that artists struggle to do, and sometimes we kid ourselves that the work we do is just as valid as putting your body on the line. And now I think that awareness has crept up, but artists need to be out there too, you know, among these conversations, among people. That's anything essential and vital happens around people.
So I guess in that sense then, if we, most recently, I guess what I can think of is the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm sure you probably saw the video of John Boyega's like quite impassioned speech at Hyde Park.
Yeah.
So would you say that's sort of what you mean in the sense of like creatives or artists going out there, speaking out and using that voice they have for their writing to be a voice for other people? I honestly can't see it any other way. Because what John Boyega did, if you're an artist and you've managed somehow to carve like some kind of place financially, and having something to lose, to see someone out there and going, I don't know if Disney's going to give me a job after this, but I'm here. That's terrifying for a lot of people, you know, because that's really what it comes down to. Yeah. If you've got something to lose, you kind of, the desk feels super safe. And however powerful your voice can relate to not just the image of John Boyega there, but the people around him on that day. How empowered will they feel? Yeah. And how sort of focused are they now? Hearing a man be there and be there among them, and being just John, you know what I mean? Like that for me that's key. And then, all right, going back to your book now. So one thing I didn't understand or been kind of confused about is, was it the murder of Lee Rigby that spurred you to write the book, or had you already started writing it and then just coincidentally this happened?
It was the Lee Rigby killing. Yeah, it was. I wasn't really working on like a long-term project. I was a filmmaker for a while. Did documentaries around human rights issues, so I was already politically engaged and was interested in extremism and those kinds of themes. But when the killing Lee Rigby happened, there was that weird mystical moment, which I can't really explain, where like I kind of knew I had to write something there, and I already thought of the kind of collective form of it, like the idea of it being made up of different voices. Yeah. The thing that disturbed me about the Lee Rigby killing was one of the killers, Michael Adebolajo, I don't know if you remember this, but the video that came out afterwards of like some woman recorded Michael Adeblajo talking about why he had just done what he just done. And the thing that got me, I've spoken about this before, but like it was a horrible, horrific video. Like he was holding a knife and it was still bloodstained and stuff. But that wasn't what shocked me. It was the fact that that guy looked like so many of my friends. He was wearing like a trackie, like I was saying, like he's wearing the same trainers we used to wear. Spoke like I used to speak at school. I used to speak at school. So like for me, that was super jarring. And since then, there's been images of like mostly young men who've committed these kinds of things, and it's the same kind of face. I recognize them as like people I would have gone to school with.
In terms of book as well, there's a lot of different characters, and like for me personally, I feel like that is one way to know when a writer is severely talented, is if you can create multiple characters, all of which are easy to follow, and all of which I guess one person reading it would be able to relate to at least one or two of the characters. But for you, was there ever a point when you was writing all these different characters that I guess you either one, based it on someone you knew, or two, the voice of the character shifted dramatically during the course of writing them?
Oh, sure. Yeah, all of them did shift. At the beginning, the way I write tends to be quite instinctive when I begin, just really following a voice through, knowing at times it will not be as settled as I would like. So say one of the young men's characters speaking like a road dialect, I know because of the way I write, it will swerve towards something that doesn't quite align. Same with Nelson's character, like a West Indian patois. Like I know in the first couple of drafts, it won't be quite right. I just have to live with that because I know I'll go back and refine it. A lot of it, I've tried to describe the writing of that book as almost an act of listening. For me, like silence, I just really need silence when I'm writing, because like it's almost again, I'm trying to hear it perfectly in my mind. But each one of them had moments where I would have to check and make sure that it felt right. One of the ways I did that was while the book itself is structured where you go from a young person's voice to an older person's voice to like all mixed up. When I was writing it, I would write one voice all the way through. So I'd go Carolyn, and I'd spent like 2 months on Carolyn's voice only. I wouldn't know how I would have written it any other way, like that way I would find consistency, I would find the rhythm of it, which is most important. And then afterwards I kind of knew where each voice connected. Later on though, during the last few drafts, that's when I reach out to people and then go, I need some pointers in terms of references. Carolyn's voice, for example, pretty late on, I found it was kind of based vaguely on someone I knew or what had worked with, like an older Irish lady who would tell me stories about her experience in Northern Ireland. And there was someone on Twitter that kind of got hold of like a early version of the book, and she pointed out that in Northern Ireland you would never call members of the IRA soldiers. You would call the British soldiers. We were volunteers. They were soldiers, and that's like a huge deal for me. Like that's something that because it says so much also about the dynamics of how people in that situation feel about themselves. So that for me is like vital. It would have inhibited me at the beginning if I would reached out to people to get their opinions, because I had to figure out what the voice was saying first. But at that point, it's vital to kind of reach out and involve those whom those experiences were closer than for me.
I guess looking at a character like Nelson, it's so easy, I guess, for me personally, come from a Caribbean background, I can identify his character in so many like people in my life, men that I know. But for you, like seeing everything that's happened, I guess, with the Rimrush generation, especially like the last 2 years politically, how does that make you, I guess, feel knowing that, you wrote this character who drew so much from that era, and to see now we're still, I guess, in a way, politicizing these people, making them feel displaced. How does that make you feel?
Probably the same way it makes many of us feel, especially during the time it happened. I remember the book came out, I think, a week just before Amber Rudd resigned. It was around the week the Windrush scandal happened, 2 years ago now. And I remember, especially with Nelson's character, there were things that were happening as I was writing it that you really feel that responsibility. During the final stages of writing the book or refining it, Grenfell happened as well. And I remember thinking, these are the exact same streets I'm writing about.
Yeah.
Like, that's the same station I would go to and see, like, Grenfell Tower, like it was it Ladbroke Grove, the station that you go past, Lammerov, where it was where you know that's the same street that's quoted non-stop in the news now. You've been writing about that for months. Part of you kind of has to resist the feeling of like editing or trying to make sure things are aligned with how they are now. Because part of the thing that Nelson taught me as I was writing it was like, these things come in circles. They come in. There's a line in the book where it says, history is not circle, but a spiral of violent rhymes. So there are things that would happen today that aren't exactly the same as how it happened back then, but they kind of rhyme.
Yeah.
You know, they're the kind of rhetoric that comes from far right protests and figureheads today they won't use the same terms as they used back then, but the sentence behind it, the intention behind it, is the same. So I think that's what was most important for me to get right in the book.
There's also a moment in the book where Nelson sees someone holding a sign saying "Keep Britain White," and obviously in terms of like what's been happening over the last month and a half or so, spurred from the murder of George Floyd in America and everything that's taken place with the Black Lives Matter movement globally, that for me really stuck out because it just kind of like spurred up everything that's kind of going on at the moment and how, you know, things really, they may have changed in some ways, but they haven't really. For you, when writing that particular moment and drawing upon, I guess, the far right groups we have in the UK, what for you was you drawing upon? Was it experiences you've seen, or was it just in terms of, I guess, social movements we have in the UK, for example, like the BNP and stuff like that?
It was a strange incident a couple of years before the Lee Ruby killing, where I spoke about Neasden being kind of like a nowhere place. You don't really know who's around you, don't really know your neighbors. There's no kind of sense of you're from here, and there are other people or other people around you that take ownership of it. But because of that, you realize there's a dissociation of the kind of sentiments of the people around you. I remember walking home once. There was a pub called the Oxen Gate, just by the Wingate at Stevens Corner, where at the time I'd read a bit about sort of British history when it comes to anti-racist movements and whatnot, and randomly I passed a garage where someone had spray painted the symbol of Oswald Mosley's political party. And it was odd because like that hadn't been in the news at the time. Like it's such a strange image to see that I've only seen in history books on a wall, on a brick wall just by where I live. That really kind of made me a little bit kind of frightened to walk home for the first time in my life. I was like maybe 20 something. It was like the fascist symbol with the thunderbolt. If anyone's seen it, it's quite a striking image. And it was brand new. Like I walk past that wall every day. and for some reason seeing that and kind of feeling unsettled for the first time about what I would have presumed was home. Yeah. And I, again, probably falsely assumed was home for people like me, had the same kind of thoughts I had about society and the types of demographics that live in places like Neasden and Crickwood. I don't know, man. It bugged me out a little bit, you know. Like it made me wonder again how much history stays history. Because the brashness of seeing a fascist symbol in Neasden, for me, revealed that sentiment has always probably been here. It's taken on different guises. And what I think is what is brilliant about the Black Lives Matter movement today is it kind of assigns implication to people in places where you wouldn't have necessarily been even aware that you were implicated.
And then I guess just to round off, what would be quite nice is for anyone watching that may want to get into writing or maybe considering it, do you have any insightful wisdom or advice to give them if they're watching this?
I'm hesitant to give any advice, honestly. I think that I would certainly lean into what makes you strange and uncomfortable about yourself. The things perhaps you're not as settled with feeling about who you are, that's usually an interesting place to start. And it doesn't mean that the work's going to be somehow therapeutic. It's something that is probably the source of where the source of what makes your work different from anyone else's is usually the things that would make you a little bit weird, or the thing that you didn't like about yourself when you were growing up. That's probably the thing you should double down on, strange enough. But again, that's not something prescriptive. I think for me that's been helpful. And also not to, and if you're at the stage where you're thinking about, you know, publishing, not be too enamored by the industry. You can respect it, you don't have to revere it. It's an industry like any other. It's got offices and paper clips, and it's pretty dull. And I guarantee though that if you get close enough, there are people who will be watching, we will be waiting to help you win.
Yeah, 100%. All right, well, thank you so much, Guy, for all your time today. For those of you watching, tune in to LBOC on Instagram, Twitter, and the YouTube and website for more interviews from either myself or other young people in Brent who will be continuing these interviews for the next couple of months. Guy, if I turn over to you, do you want to share any socials or where people can find you?
Another bit of advice, probably best not to spend too much time on Twitter. Just as a thing, I'm not on there, so I don't really have anything to share. You can follow me on Instagram. It's at GuyStory12.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Guy. Thank you for your time today. Thank you.